Hi, I'm Kay Eck, and welcome to my podcast, Alive and Kicking Stories of Waking Up. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to be here today with my friend Thea Sullivan. And Thea and I have known each other for, who knows, I don't know, years. And we've shared our path quite closely for a few years, which has been absolutely wonderful. I highly recommend having a friend like Thea to share this crazy journey with. So, first of all, thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
And thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Awesome. So before we get started today, I just want to, usually I like to start with, kind of going into a little bit of your background and talking a little bit about this concept of awakening. But one of the things that you and I have in common, I think, in our shared journey is that we had a strong commitment to the academic and intellectual way of being. And so I thought maybe we could jump in there because we're both writers and initially came at it from that academic and intellectual side. And then things kind of shifted for both of us. So let's start there. Tell me a little bit about how you started out.
Started out as a human?
As a human or as a writer in your...
Okay. Well, I'll just back up and say that as a kid and as an adolescent, I was always sort of hungry for meaning. And I had a lot of existential angst as a young person that didn't make a lot of sense in the context of where I lived or how I grew up. Like I had questions that nobody seemed to be interested in. Nothing against them, but everybody around me seemed more content with things as they were. And I was always unsatisfied, I guess, or yearning for something more. So I liked to go to church as a kid, even though my family wasn't religious, because it just seemed to get at the bigger questions or gave me some kind of solace. And then I found literature. And it was in English classes as a young person that finally we were having the conversations that began to approach my questions. And I idolized my English teachers because they talked about why are we here and what does it mean to be a human being and what's important. And, I even remember reading books in high school, like Dostoevsky and the idea of like Christian existentialism. And it was the closest that I could come to the yearning that I felt. So I studied literature. And I studied some religious studies, but I often think that like, what have I always been interested in? What have been like, what is the meaning of life? The idea of creativity, mysticism, spirituality, they were always there, but I didn't really have words for them. So an academic path and a path of studying literature came the closest that I could find. Go ahead.
That's so fascinating because I that's exactly how I would describe my youth. I was always like, the one that was like moody and broody, excuse me, and like in the corner observing like what the hell, when everybody else seemed to, I think everybody has those questions, but some people are able to sort of keep them at bay and some people just absolutely have to drive forward toward them. And I guess that would characterize us both, have to drive toward them.
Yes.
Not turn away.
Exactly. I have a little story that pops to mind that I'll tell you. So I loved reading as a kid, and I, consumed all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books like many young girls do. But what I did with it was I remember sitting in the backseat of my parents' car as probably a preteen and imagining that Laura was with me in the back seat and we would be driving. And I remember particularly, we lived outside of New York City in Connecticut. And I remember sometimes we would drive on the, well, I can't remember, it's called the Cross Bronx Expressway. But anyway, at that time in the 70s, there was a lot of urban blight all around, you know, some burned out buildings and things, and things were, you know, there was a lot of urban decay. And I remember thinking about the lives of the people who lived in those neighborhoods. And I remember talking to Laura in my mind and trying to explain to her how we got here. Like, yeah, because it seemed like the world she lived in made more sense to me in my imagination, you know, and also the sense of the earth, like, what have we done? And this is because I could feel that she would be sad if she saw what I was seeing out the window. So, yeah.
Did she speak back?
No, she just looked out the window.
Wow.
Yeah, so, but there was a point at which I think literature wasn't enough. And I tried to go to church, and church wasn't quite right either. And then there's a way that, you know, I love to write and I love to create. And then that became sort of something I got very driven about and very ambitious about. And that's another rabbit hole that one can go down.
Yeah. So this, you know, kind of angsty period that you went through, or just your way of being in the world, which was very deep and thoughtful and yearning and seeking. Mm-hmm. How did that fit into your family structure? Were you different? Did that make things difficult for you?
Yes, I was the sensitive one in my family. You know, I was sort of labeled oversensitive, or, you know, I thought too much. Yeah, I think my family wanted me to lighten up, you know. It was hard for them, I think. They didn't understand. And then I also became sort of the, what's the word for that? I sort of became the emotional support person for both my parents as I got older. Their marriage was not very happy. And they both sort of turned to me. My mom says, and she's gone through her own spiritual journey and is an amazing woman at 79. But at the time, she was really struggling and depressed and, you know, drinking too much. Both my parents were drinking too much. And she used to say that I was the only one who was present in the family.
Wow.
Yeah. She said it was like, how did she put it? Like I was the only one where the light was on or something. Oh. And so she would turn to me to get her emotional needs met. And I remember genuinely wanting to help my parents. You know, like I could feel their unhappiness and I just wanted to make them happy. Of course, I became very unhappy. You know, I don't know how much I took on of their suffering.
Yeah.
But that went on for years where I just energetically felt their suffering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That early early period really reminds me also of my youth, in that I think that when a child is deep and seeking, that gets mislabeled as sad and depressed.
Yeah. Yes.
It's not the same thing, you know. It's like a searching for something that's missing. It's like you're searching for your wholeness, and that's like really hard to do, and that mislabeling it doesn't help, because then you start to think there's something wrong with you.
Oh, I absolutely thought there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I became what they call in psychology, I was sort of the identified patient, right? I was the one who was depressed, or the one who, you know, something was wrong with me. That was the feeling. And it's funny because I just remembered, and I know this is normal developmentally, but all that started, I think, more like right around the time of hitting puberty, because before that, I was a super joyful kid. As a matter of fact, I look back at this and I find this so interesting. I convinced my parents to decorate my room when I was in elementary school, all in rainbows. So I had literally multicolored rainbow wallpaper. I had a rainbow bedspread. I had rainbow everything. I was like, and I was really, really joyful. I still think I'm trying to get back to that girl, like, because it was, yeah, I was just, I also used to write, this is funny. I used to write like a lot of little girls. I used to write on my binder, Thea is great. Thea is great. Right? So yeah, still trying to get back to that girl. She's, you know, she's still with me. But
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of feel like I've just gotten back to my second grade self. I have like, I feel like there's finally a match. And it feels amazing. It honestly feels amazing.
yeah.
And not only to just like be in that space of second graderness, but
Mhm.
also to know that who I was then was real and authentic
Yes.
and valid and just
Yeah.
right. You
Yes.
know? Yeah, that's been amazing. Amazing thing. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
that
that's,
natural joy and
yeah.
and sort of sense of well-being.
Yes. And that's, I mean, this is like maybe getting off topic a little bit, but I think we have ideas about what joy is that might be a little bit distorted. You know, we think it means like happy and laughing and
Mhm.
dancing. And of
Mhm.
course, that's wonderful. And who doesn't want to
Yeah.
do that? But there's also, but to me, it's like that unwavering sense of rightness.
Yeah.
That no matter what happens around you, you're right
Yes.
and true,
Yes.
you know?
And that I feel like that I've got. That I've got. And that's been the gift of the last, I don't know, I want to say the 5 years or so.
Yeah.
That sense of unwavering peace, no matter what is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, joy is like a little quieter, and I feel it like an upwelling of like
Mhm.
warmth and well-being.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. I've got like the goosebumps.
Oh, good.
Yeah. All right. So going back to your trajectory,
Hmm.
you started to become really ambitious about your writing. What did that look like?
Oh, you know, I took a lot of creative writing workshops in college. I published a story in the graduate literary magazine at my university. I, you know, I looked into graduate school for creative writing. I thought about going to New York to do freelance writing. So I wanted to make my name as a writer, basically. And I thought I'd be a fiction writer. And that's ironically looking back now. And now I, you know, teach intuition and I'm obsessed with inner knowing and how do we know what we know. I thought I was a fiction writer, but I realize now the reason I thought that is because the first course I got into, it was by lottery in my university, was fiction, beginning fiction writing. And I did well and I got a lot of praise. So I thought, okay, I'm a fiction writer. So I went on for another 5 years thinking I was a fiction writer, even though I've always been more of a poet, more of an essayist. But it took me a long time to come back to that because I had heard other people tell me that I was good at it.
Yeah.
So, and
I,
plus being a fiction writer was cool and I wanted to be cool.
yeah. Yeah. I always, though this isn't really supposed to be about me,
Go ahead, Kay.
but I, I never saw myself as a fiction writer. I was like, I cannot make up stories, but I can tell you like what's going on like right now, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's funny, but, and
Well,
it's funny that you mentioned poetry because poetry is actually more nonfiction than fiction, isn't
yes.
it?
Yes. And I wrote poetry since I was a young teenager. And that was actually another one of those like finding a path was when I wrote poetry. And it's kind of cliche to say I was an angsty adolescent who wrote poetry, but really that was a container for my questions, for, you know, the meaning that I was looking for. And it worked kind of to talk to the page through poetry. It could contain how I was feeling and what I was, you know, wondering about in a way that nothing else in my life could.
Yeah.
So, and that's, you know, writing, that's been the through line really for writing for me is that it's been, even though it's changed the way that I use it and the way that I think about it, it has been the most reliable outlet and container and path for me
Mhm. Yeah.
on my journey.
So when you were following that ambition to become a writer,
Yeah.
where did that lead you?
Well, there were some interesting U-turns. So when I graduated from college, I, I had published some fiction, and I wanted to, like, as I say, I wanted to become a writer, but I was also scared. I didn't know what that would look like. And I also wanted to be a teacher. And I wanted to be an English teacher, like the English teachers that I so admired as a young person. I also met a guy who, I don't know, was kind of an insecure guy and really into teaching, and I think a little threatened by my writing ability or something. And I did one of those sort of U-turns where I was like, oh, I'm not going to write, I'm just going to teach. So I sort of gave away my power for a while, and then reclaimed it. And then, I taught English, and I taught in middle school and high school in my 20s, and I taught poetry, and I shared poems with kids, and I got them writing poems. And hopefully I tried to be the English teacher that I loved having. And then, but I guess I would say that I was too afraid to really pursue the writing path the way that I wanted to. So it was a conflict.
Hmm.
But by the time I was 28, 27, I quit being an English teacher. I moved to a cabin in the woods. I spent like a year writing, and then I applied to graduate school in creative writing. So I thought, I have to do this before I'm 30. Like, I have to, and during that time, that was one of those times. So when you talk about spiritual awakening, there have been these junctures in my life where I sort of threw everything up in the air because I didn't know. I knew what I was doing wasn't quite working for me, and I didn't know what I needed to be doing. And I was privileged enough to be able to take this time and to live in this cabin that my family owned, and to not work for a little while, and to just try to see what was next for me. So that wasn't the first time that I had carved out time in my life to work on my writing, and it kind of turned into something different. So I'll tell you about this other time when I was about 26 years old, and I was working as a high school teacher, and I decided to go part-time at my job so that I could have some hours every day to write. And I was excited about this and ambitious about it, and I had this whole plan about how many stories I was going to write. And day after day, what happened as I sat down at my desk is that I was really struggling with this fiction writing, and I was feeling all this emotional stuff come up, which turned out to be a lot of grief from childhood and stuff that had just there'd not been room for it in my life. And I really felt like I was failing. And I was beating myself up about it. And then I'd go back to the fiction and try to make it work and just suffer. And finally, one day, and I was beginning to have more of a sense of my own spirituality at that time too, reading books. And it was 1993 in San Francisco, and the city is alive with spiritual things happening. So that was in my consciousness too, and in my sense of self too. And so there was this one day in March of 1993, I was sitting at my desk and I was trying to write fiction. It wasn't working. I was tired of crying. I felt just completely emptied out, and I just prayed for help. I literally looked up and said, help. I don't know what to do. Like, I was so unhappy and felt like I was failing. And I started to hear words in my head, not audibly, but it was like thoughts appearing in my head, but they weren't my thoughts. And I hadn't had this experience before, so I just wrote them down. And they kept coming, and I kept writing them down, and they kept coming, and I kept writing them down. And I also felt a tingling at the top of my head, like on my crown. I felt a little like, whoa. And I didn't really know what this was. I thought I was making it up, but I always say, like, I was just so happy to be putting words on the page that were flowing easily that I was like, whatever, I'm just going to write this stuff down. And when I looked back at it, well, a couple interesting things happened. Number one, I realized it didn't sound like me. The words were more succinct and eloquent than I would write. Also, that it was addressing me. They were actually these kind of declarative statements addressing me. And I realized, oh, that's the answer to my prayer. And I thought I was making it up, and I was questioning myself. But then a few days later, I would go back and read it again and have no memory of having written it. Wow. And that's been true ever since. Now I channel for clients, and I have manuscripts of channeled material. And when I go back, I usually don't remember any of it.
Wow.
Yeah, and when clients will say, oh, the guide said this thing to me, and I'll be like, let me refresh my memory, because I have no idea. So all of that helped me know that this was a different kind of writing than I had done before.
So then did you go through a period of denying that? Because you ended up back in the cabin.
Yes.
Writing fiction.
Well, here's the thing that was interesting. So I thought that was very cool that I was getting that kind of help, basically. There's part of me that was super uncomfortable with it and thought it was too weird. And if I said, oh, this is channeling, that would be way too grandiose. But I found the advice very helpful. Like there was basically the theme was listen and let go, right? Let go of your agenda, like let things come to you. I mean, it was a lot of surrender, trust, listen, let go. And to the extent that I applied that to my writing, it was actually really helping and I gradually stopped trying to write fiction, and I gradually started to write poetry and essays. And I actually, in a few years after that, I'm jumping ahead, but I began teaching creative writing using the principles that were given to me, who I would later understand to be the guides or my higher aspects. But at the same time, I sort of compartmentalized it. I sort of put it in a box. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing this kind of writing. I sort of saw it as my personal, like, spiritual writing coach. Not as, I mean, I did ask questions about issues in my life. And I think I may have told a roommate that I'm doing this thing. But yeah, I was pretty tight-lipped about it because I was pretty ambivalent about it. There was a lot of fear about grandiosity or who did I think I was to think that I maybe was channeling. So that was 93, and I did not go public until 2016.
Wow. So was there also a part of you that had to let go of thinking that your writing came from your mind and that was your craft?
I still think of them as sort of two different things. How do I put this? I mean, there's writing as channeling on one side. And when I do that, it's just straight, like, comes straight out. And I don't craft it. I mean, I might change, I don't know. I don't even really change any words at this point. And I still think of sort of my creative writing, because I have written and published personal essays and poetry and stuff. The difference is that ironically, how do I put this? Most of my adult life has been spent thinking about creativity and where it comes from and what to do with it. So now I work more specifically with spirituality, with people and their paths, with getting them guidance, talking about intuition. But for most of my adult life, I took the principles that I was getting through the guides and I applied them to my own creativity and to other people's creativity. So and I do think within that, and just like in life in general, the mind has a role. The mind just has to come in much, much later in the process.
Yeah.
Right? Like what the guides have taught me is that you know, it's kind of like inspiration comes first, and then what you do with it comes next. Rather than the problem that I was having earlier was I was driving with my mind, right? I was deciding which direction I should go in, what I should do, how it should look, all with my mind. And my spirit wasn't cooperating. Like my heart was not on board. And so I suffered. I was in an intense inner turmoil,
Mm.
right? And now I understand that the surrender is about, like, we have to lead from our intuition and our heart and our spirit, and then we can use our mind to help us navigate in the world.
Mm.
But I mean, the guides talk about it as like, if our spirit, our intuition, our heart, or even, you know, our soul's agenda, that's sort of the divine feminine knowing queen who makes the decisions about what's going to happen. And then our masculine doing active principle is sort of the knight who goes out and executes.
Mm. Mm. Love that.
And I don't mean to suggest that the soul is not, I mean, that the soul is, they're masculine and feminine are obviously in balance and married on a spiritual level, but that the receptive has to come before the active.
Yeah. So you've talked about how your spiritual path has manifest in your professional life. Has
Mm-hmm.
it also changed how you're in the world in a personal way, in your relationships? And
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, to go back to what we talked about when I was a kid and I was picking up on people's emotions and trying to, um, you know, be a support person for both my parents. And so, in some ways, dealing with that kind of sensitivity or the ability to pick up on other people's feelings um, has been something I've had to learn to work with. Um, because what came along with that, with the yearning, to go back to that, the yearning that I felt was also about yearning to connect with people on a deep level.
mm-hmm.
And one of the dangers of that for me was always finding other people wanting, like, why aren't they present like I want to be present? Why aren't they being sensitive like I want to be sensitive, or something? So part of my spiritual journey and my journey of personal growth has been to also let go of what I expect from other people,
Mm.
and really realizing that my work is my work. Like, I need to um, own my own emotional journey and let other people be as they are. And so that has meant having relationships that are based on me not trying to change the other person, uh, me not making other people wrong for being different than I am, and also me um, accepting that I need a lot of space to do emotional work and to be as sensitive as I am. And nobody else has to fix that for me, but that becomes something that it's kind of a journey of self-love, really, and realizing that the yearning, part of it is to turn that yearning back into inward and to find what I'm looking for within.
Mm.
And in that way, becoming, I guess they say, self-sourcing, right? And that's taken me a long time to get to that point where I don't just believe it, I feel it. So I know that when I need something, it's not that I'm not going to ask for support from friends and, you know, my loved ones, but ultimately my support is within and from the divine through myself. And the guides have taught me that. And that then the guides say that when we become self-sourcing, we become both the lover and the beloved, or actually the beloved and then the lover.
Mm.
So I have learned to feel beloved, to know myself as beloved. And then nobody else has to kind of meet my checklist
Mm,
of
yeah.
how they need to be for me. I mean, if I'm in a situation that's untenable, I can say this isn't working for me.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, within the context of healthy relationships,
Yeah.
it's nobody's job to make me feel loved. It's my job to know I'm loved. And then it's my job to radiate out that love in a just naturally, right?
Yeah.
So, and I hope that that has taken a lot of pressure off the people who love me and who
Yeah.
I love.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. Wow. So,
and I'll say one more thing about that. That's also about realizing we're all, we're all souls on our journey. So I'm not here to judge anybody because I don't know what they're up to.
yeah.
Just like I didn't know what I was up to for a long time.
yeah. Yeah. You learned to, I mean, I think it's kind of like incredible and awesome that you literally have a life coach inside your head. Like,
Yeah, very lucky.
or like somewhere over your shoulder. That's like kind of sounds crazy to me. But the truth is that we all have that.
Yes,
And this is
exactly.
your work is
Exactly.
now is to teach people how to connect with the teacher within, the guide within. So talk a little bit about how you went from teaching writing to teaching intuition.
Okay. Um, well, I think in a funny way, when I taught creative writing, my course that I taught for 15 years was called The Intuitive Voice, which is kind of funny. But I was teaching writers how to connect to that natural voice that wanted to come through them and to accept it as, naturally unique, and to stop comparing themselves to other people, but really, and to stop, to kind of get the mind out of the way, just like I had to learn to do myself. And we did meditation, and, we did a lot of sort of connect to your intuition as a writer in my course. So in a way, I was already teaching that, and I didn't quite realize it. Then I took a break from that teaching, had a child, and was quite sort of absorbed in that. And then when it was kind of time for me to pick up my career again, um, I just sort of felt this sea change that I didn't want to teach writing anymore. I kind of just wanted to connect more with the guides. And actually, when I sat down to write more and more, I just didn't feel compelled to create as much as I felt compelled to just listen
Mm,
and let what wanted to come through come through. And it ended up being, the guides sort of started to almost write essays through me about big questions. Um, and actually, I think I backed into teaching about intuition and even backed into working with clients because I had a manuscript of channeled material that I was shopping around, and I happen to have an agent who, we haven't sold anything together, but she's committed to working with me when I have something. And I showed her this manuscript, and she said, "This is all great stuff, but we kind of need to know who you are in this field."
mm,
So you might want to, and every writer has heard this, right? Where's your promotional platform and who are you anyway? So that made me think, well, let me try giving readings for clients and I gave them for free to friends to see how that went. And it went great. It blew my mind, actually. I was able to bring through guidance for them in a way I'd only ever brought through for myself and for my husband. Um, and I guess the way that got me to teaching intuition is because the guides are teachers. Like the energy I bring through is really a very much of a teaching energy. It's not necessarily a here are the answers to all your questions. It's
mm,
much more like, here's the next lesson for you to work on so that you can know your own answers. And um, I feel this very clearly when I tune in to the guides, is that they really want us to come up to the level where they are. It's not a hierarchical energy at all. It's actually a very empowering energy. they sort of see us as friends and peers. We're just on a different level of consciousness than they are, partly because we incarnated on the earth where it's dense and, you know, there's a lot, and they have so much love and respect for the choice to incarnate as a human. Like they're really quite in awe of us, which is a really cool feeling.
Yeah.
But they really want us to learn to know what we know. And so that sort of energy of instruction kind of coming through gave me all this material, and also just made me really feel like I want to share that with more people. And I want to translate it into more of our language. And here's another interesting thing. So I resisted the guides as what they were, or what work I was doing for many years, obviously like 20 years. And then I resisted being a collaborator with them. I kept wanting to be the kind of channel who just puts everything on paper and walks away. Like, this is theirs, not mine, and I'm just the vessel. They actually call me the vessel, which is funny. But I have gotten the message over and over again that I'm also the translator and I'm the collaborator. They said they want to be consultants with me. They want me to go ahead and like take the reins and like, you know, bring this down to earth. So I guess I just felt like the need and the desire to empower people to know their own answers and to hear their own inner wisdom. Because really, I think it's kind of similar to teaching writing. What I was doing when I was teaching writing is to say, forget everything that everybody else has told you or all the comparisons you're doing. And like, it's almost like you can't see yourself because you're you. But it's all already there. And I think this is true about inner knowing. It's like, we just haven't been taught to know what we know. There's all these layers on top, like socialization and comparison, and what we've been taught as, I mean, to go back to the idea of you and I both having kind of intellectual training and valuing academia, I mean, all that stuff's pretty cool, but it also can really screw us up in terms of what we think is real or true or respectable or necessary.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of it are valued. A lot of it's about unlearning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, part of what I had to do to get where I am now is also decide that I could let go of what anyone else thought of me.
Yeah. That's a big one, isn't it?
It's a really big one.
Yeah. Especially when you were seeking to be respected in an intellectual and academic way. That I just find that really hard to let go of. I found it hard to let go of.
Absolutely.
I'm still struggling with that some days, you know, like sometimes I don't bring out all the guns, you know, like I bring out a water pistol.
Yeah. Well, and the fear of being weird or different, or the fear of being what's the word I want? Dismissed or okay, so I would say like the culture that I grew up in, like stuff that would be considered spiritual or, you know, new agey, it would be laughed at. It would be seen as silly.
Yeah.
Minimized,
marginalized. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And oh, that's something that like kooky people do.
Right.
And I think that's why it took me so many years to be out.
Yeah.
And frankly, this is kind of sad to say, but my dad died in 2016 and I launched my business in 2017. And I adored my dad, but he was very much a product of the, you know, I guess he was a benevolent patriarch, basically. Yeah. And he was one of the people who would laugh uncomfortably about spiritual things. Yeah. So it's, and I would have probably still launched my work publicly, but I would never have told him. I would have kept it from him because I didn't want to be laughed at, and his opinion mattered so much to me.
Yeah, I still feel that way. Honestly, you know, like yeah. But it's getting better, isn't it?
Well, it is. And for me, it's also like the way I like to work and the language I like to use, like part of my, what feels like my calling. This is part of, letting my intuition speak. So part of what I think my role is to normalize this stuff.
Yeah.
Because, and I think that, in one of our first conversations, Kay, you talked about the idea of being a bridge tender.
Mhm.
And the idea of creating a bridge between ordinary consciousness and sort of the new consciousness, right? If I'm putting
Yes.
that the right way.
Mhm.
And I really feel that, like, I really want to be a welcoming gateway for people to say, no, you're not weird. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to listen to signs, synchronicities, dreams, these urges, to believe that there's much more going on here. And one of my favorite things to do when I teach intuition is we have a class where I give everyone like a checklist, and it's kind of that game, like, have you ever? And on the checklist are all sort of, have you ever felt like a deceased loved one was around? Have you ever seen something and known it meant something more? Have you ever had an encounter with an animal that just gave you goosebumps for some reason? And I have a whole list of them. And people check off as many as apply. And then we go around the circle and everyone tells a story. And by the end, and some of these are things they've never said out loud. They've never admitted this because they dismissed it, or because it would be too weird to mention it. But everybody has these stories.
Yeah.
I would say the great majority of human beings have these stories.
Yes.
We don't share them.
Yeah.
And and I'll tell you, the energy in the room when we're done is fantastic. It's like champagne. People are laughing and they're so relieved, and people will have these incredible ahas during that class, like, oh my God, that time that I saw that, whatever it's called, murmuration of swallows out my window on my mother's birthday, 10 years after she died, like, that was my mom. I knew that was something. Or, and that sense of mutual discovery and safety.
Yeah.
And magic,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
It's
I
thrilling.
yeah, I think of living the way that I was brought up to live, that we were all brought up to live, is like, it's good, and it's like right here. It's like
Mhm.
it's in a narrow lane,
Yes.
and letting go of the barriers, the borders, and embracing all the rest of it is like living like this.
Yes.
It's like, it's just, it's so much better. There's like no way to put it. It's just so much better.
That's
So
right.
yeah, I really want to thank you for being here and talking about that, because I
My
have so much
pleasure.
respect for you, and I love your journey, because it's just like mine. So
Thank you. Well,
but
and the one thing I'll say about this is, the other thing about this for me is that there's not room for the deep feelings, the harder stuff, the denser stuff that we need to work through and release to make space for the joy or the higher awareness or whatever. So it's kind of constraining us on both sides.
yeah,
And and it does take a certain kind of courage
yes, it does.
to let that, to trust ourselves, to trust what wants to come through, good
Yeah,
and bad, right? To kind of ride those waves.
yeah,
And I have to say, I think that's been the greatest source of that peace that we talked about before, is like, I'm realizing I'm not wrong. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
I'm not, like, there's not something wrong with me. And I all the things where I thought I was off track, I was right on track. That's been a huge gift.
yeah, yeah. That's beautiful.
And I can look back and go, oh, Thea, you did a good job. Like, I kept listening to myself, even though I thought I was crazy or wrong or failing or yeah, just not succeeding at life, because my inner journey took up so much space in my life.
Yeah, yeah,
Now I'm reaping the rewards of it and able to give so much to other people. without, as a benefit to myself too, because I did all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's so beautiful. I love that so much.
Well, I'm grateful,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now I get to have friends like you, Kay.
Yay. Yeah, I know. It's incredible.
It's awesome.
Oh, all right. Well, that sounds like this is a good time to maybe slip into our lightning round.
Oh, fun.
Okay. Are you
Yes.
ready?
Yes.
All right. Thea, what's your favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Why?
I wasn't expecting myself to say that.
Oh.
It just popped out. Um, I think that I think the hope of Christmas, like, even though I don't really identify particularly as Christian, I think that the beauty of the Christmas story and the idea of like Christ incarnating to be with us is still a very moving idea to me.
That's beautiful. I'd say to me, it's all about the twinkly lights and the candles.
I like the lights too. I like the tree too.
Yeah. But I also love Jesus. I love the Jesus story too. But I say that I had to, I broke up with Jesus a while ago, and I just started thinking about getting back together with him. So we'll see how that goes.
I think he's cool either way.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Do you feel infinite? And if so, how does that feel?
I do. I feel infinite in the sense that I am unafraid of dying. I mean, I worry occasionally about like, well, I don't want to be in pain or whatever, but I have no doubt that I will go on after this life. And I'm kind of excited to see what's next.
Yeah. Oh.
So, and that gives me such comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel bigger than this human.
Yeah. Sometimes in my, more 3D life, when I thought about being infinite, I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? That sounds exhausting.
Yeah, true, right?
But like where I am now, it feels like, oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
It's just going to continue to get bigger and better, like that's going to be amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and the guides talk a lot about there being no time. And I don't, my human mind doesn't get it, but I kind of have a vague memory of what that might be like.
Interesting. I think of that time, there may not be linear time, but there'll always be expansion.
Yeah.
And that's a movement of a sort. It's just a
Right.
movement of a different sort.
Right. It's not static.
Right. Yeah. Okay. What do you feel hopeful about?
I think I'm gonna say young people. Like on this planet, I'm hopeful about young people. Yeah. I think there's a whole new generation of beings coming in. They're just knocking our socks off, and they're gonna keep knocking our socks off.
Yeah.
So they make me hopeful.
Yeah.
And then I feel hopeful in another way about, can I give 2 answers?
Yeah.
Just expansion and awakening. I can feel, it's not always something I can see with my eyes, but I can feel it with my clients. And I just think there's a hunger for awakening. And that excites me. That makes me hopeful.
Yeah, me too. What's the difference between prayer and manifestation?
That's a good question. Do you mind if I pause?
No.
I mean, for me, prayer has become a sense of beingness. Like, wonderful. I don't pray for things as much anymore. Prayer is coming into presence for me, and connecting, like with the higher reality. And manifestation for me is starting to feel like play. I would say I'm still new at it in some ways, but like I manifest parking spots all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I know I'm not alone in this, but to me that's become delightful play.
Yeah.
Like I've really learned to do it. Like it really works, and I have fun with it. And so now I'm expanding that out to more. But yeah, I guess the difference for me is that for me, prayer is like sacred, the sacredness of now, and manifestation is like play. Okay.
Oh, that's so interesting. To me, when I wrote this question down, I thought, oh, prayer to me is the knowing of what I'm not responsible for, and manifestation is the knowing of what I am responsible for.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Do you prefer dusk or dawn?
Dusk.
Oh.
I'm not a morning person.
So
Yeah.
that is like a no-brainer for you.
That's a biological thing for me.
Yeah. I used to be such a dawn person, but I've kind of turned into a dusk person. And at dusk, pretty much every day, I receive this incredible wave of peace.
At dawn
At
or
dusk.
dusk? Oh.
At dusk. Yeah, like unbelievable, like full body, just like peaceful excitement, like just, oh, yeah, it's really
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally, did you go to camp as a kid? And what was that like?
Yes. I have a fantastic camp story. So is it okay if I give a longer answer here?
Yeah.
Okay. So my parents kept trying to, I grew up on the East Coast and camp was a thing, right? And so they sent me to Girl Scout camp and horse riding camp and tennis camp, I don't even know what. And I didn't like any of the sailing camp. Oh God, I almost flunked out of that one. My dad was a sailor, but he couldn't convert me. So, and so I was unhappy at all these camps. So out of exasperation, my mom found a camp consultant and she brought me to a camp consultant and they interviewed me to find out what kind of camp I would like, which is kind of a good metaphor for my childhood, right? They needed to, bless my mom's heart for doing this, right? Like she knew she didn't know me well enough to know what I would like. So she found somebody, and she didn't know about all these different camps. So they interviewed me, and based on my answers, they recommended this camp called Apple Farm Arts and Music Center in Southern New Jersey, coolest place on the planet. I went, so this was an arts and music camp. I went for the first time in 1977, and I always like to say the 60s were still alive and well at Apple Farm Arts and Music Center. There were many bearded men playing guitars. There were like counselors from all around the world. There were gay kids. It was just a bohemian, like smorgasbord of wonderful things, art, music, drama. And I found my people there for the first time in my life. So at 11 years old, I was like finally dropped into an environment that felt right.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I cried my eyes out when it was time to leave. And I went back every summer for, 5 years. And then I became a counselor there for a year when I was in college.
My gosh.
Yes. And it was because it was a place where people were free to be whoever they were. And it was very joyful and funny and creative. And there was even a counselor who taught transcendental meditation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's like that is such a metaphor for where we're headed. It's like when you drop into who you really are, it's super fun.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yes. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And that sense of me, the difference, I'm so grateful to my parents for letting me go there, because it was like going from thinking that something was wrong with me because I didn't feel like I fit, even though I looked like I fit, to suddenly fitting and knowing what that felt like and feeling embraced and valued and seen. I felt seen there.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was such a gift to me. It was a huge gift to me.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay,
thanks, Mom, Dad.
Yeah, thanks, Mom and Dad. So do you have a question for me?
I do. I would like to know how intuition works for you.
Mm. So,
How do you know what you know? What does
yeah.
it feel like? How does
So
it comfort
I feel that I have somewhat of an unusual connection to my intuition in that I have never experienced it being outside of my body.
you? Mm.
It's always within, like deeply in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never felt like it was someone else's voice. Like it was me,
Mm-hmm.
but it was like a wisdom that rises
Mm-hmm.
from like the solar plexus into the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And my intellect, I could distinguish it between my intellect because the thoughts of the mind traveled from the mind down to like the mouth or the throat. And so I've always just been super connected to it. It's never been separate from me. And
Yes.
I find that maybe is a slightly different experience.
I think that feeling intuition in the body is yeah, I would say, I mean, it sounds like the strength of yours, like you feel it really concretely in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is one of the big ways that we tend to feel like the yeses and the nos in the body. So let's say you get a no on something. What does it feel like in your body?
One of the other, before I get into that, one of the other experiences that I have is that I can't really ask myself questions
Hmm.
because the answers come before I can even formulate the question.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes if I'm not like in a super quiet place where I'm super tuned in, I'll
Mm-hmm.
miss it. So that happens so often that I just stopped asking the questions and whatever I need to know
Mm-hmm.
rises. And I assume that there's nothing that I need to know that I don't know, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
That's, I do know. That's awesome.
Yeah. So the so in that way I don't really ask myself yes and no questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's more just like I'm doing this now. I'm doing that now.
Yeah.
And I also allow myself to make mistakes. I don't hold myself to some impossibly high standard where I can't make mistakes. Um,
I think that's so important
yeah,
because it gives a certain kind of freedom.
yeah,
Um, and the other thing you're talking about, I think what you're talking about is just closing the gap, right, between
yeah,
the question and the answer. It's like there doesn't need to be a question because the answer is just there, and then you just flow with it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's
And
how long has it been like that? Like,
um, well, I want to say it's always been like that.
awesome.
I tried to impose questions on myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, probably 5 years ago or something like that. And um, that was always the guidance that I was receiving from, you know, mentors or spiritual teachers or people I had sessions with or, you know, all that stuff. You know, like ask yourself this, ask yourself that. And that
Mm-hmm.
just never worked for me. So I kind of feel like it was just, that's just the way it was for me.
Yeah.
I also have the experience of rarely being outside of my body. I
Mm-hmm.
think that because I was always really physical kid. I was a tomboy. I was an athlete. I loved experiencing life through my body. You know, laying on the wet grass in the hot sun and the steam, and you know, that was just my way of being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have that experience of being outside of my body very often. Sometimes, you know, I do. I can like get to daydreaming and that kind of thing. But yeah, so yeah, that's just it.
Thank you. Well, and the reason I want to ask that is because I continue to learn from my students about different ways that people experience intuition, talk about it, conceptualize it. And I think that anytime we try to make ourselves fit into some mold or some, I'm really not trying to make anybody do it like I do it. I want each person to find their way, which probably is already there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like my experience of like trying to ask the questions that people were telling me to ask.
Yeah.
I probably wasted a lot of time on that. and also like, I had to just come to the realization that if I don't know the answer, then I don't know the answer. I just
Totally.
whatever, that's just it. I might know some other stuff, but I don't know that.
Right.
So
And we don't have to know everything.
yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's not time to know something.
Yeah.
Like it'll show up.
Yeah. Well, Thea, I have just loved our time together, and I hope that you have too. Before we go, I just want to mention that if people are interested, you have a group on Facebook called, what's it called?
It's called The Intuitive Way with Thea and the Guides.
The Intuitive Way with Thea and the Guides. So that's open to the public, and it's really beautiful community. It's beautiful information that's coming through, and anybody can just find you on Facebook and send you a message, or
yes, they can just ask to join. And the other way that people can find me is at my website, which is bigpictureguidance.com. And it's going to be switched over in the next month or two to theasullivan.com. Although if you use bigpictureguidance.com, it'll redirect you there anyway. So you can't
awesome.
go.
And we'll also put that in the notes below the podcast. But anyway, I want to thank you for being with me today. And
thank you,
I hope to see you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.